Well, I'm going to try and sum up a 2-week tour with Venerable Children in Indonesia, and this will just be skimming the surface. So here's my first shot at it. And I thought I would start off by talking about Lama Atisha's journey to the island of Sumatra, which is where we ended up going to first, and just sort of comparing notes with his experience and ours. So at the age of 29, while circumambulating Bodh Gaya's great stupa, Atisha experienced a clear vision in which 2 manifestations of Tara appeared in the space before him. One asked the other, "What's the most important practice for achieving enlightenment?" The other replied, "The practice of bodhicitta, supported by loving kindness and great compassion. That's the most important." So Atisha formed the single-minded aspiration to perfect his understanding and practice the mind of enlightenment, or bodhicitta. After checking thoroughly with a number of scholars and yogis, Atisha learned that a high master called, I don't know if I can do this one, Suvarnadipa, later known to Tibetans as Sirlingpa, was reputed to have the most vast and profound realizations of bodhicitta. Sirlingpa lived on the distant island of Sumatra in present-day Indonesia. And so Atisha made this journey to Sumatra by boat with a group of traders. The voyage took more than 13 months, and many difficulties arose along the way. So let's think about this part just for a minute. 13 months in an 11th century boat. So let's think about the quality of the food, the quality of the water, no pills for motion sickness. If you did know the phrase, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday," who cares? No one to hear it, no GPS. So it was really quite something. And according to some stories, there were many obstacles that came up on this 13th month journey. Of course, if you're going to go hear the Dharma, obstacles are going to come up. So this is one version of one of the obstacles. At one point, the boat was attacked by Mahashvara, who took the shape of a giant sea monster, causing a tremendous storm to descend upon the boat with a whirlpool. And from this whirlpool emerged a sea monster, threatening to devour everyone on board. Okay, so the next time you have a long-haul flight to Europe or Asia, and you're getting a little bit cranky about the circumstances, just think of this story, and it may sort of reestablish what's difficult and what's not. So, in response to this sea monster coming from this whirlpool, Atisha establishes himself in deep meditation and generates compassion and loving kindness. Now that, along with a genuine, humble, probably desperate request from his terrified traveling companions, created the cause for Amrita Kundali, the wrathful Buddhist deity, to manifest. And this deity destroyed the sea monster. So they made it through the 13 months, they get to Sumatra. He first carefully investigates Sirlingpa's qualities by closely questioning his friends and students, and then he approaches Sirlingpa to receive these teachings. And Sirlingpa agreed to provide the transmission of all the bodhicitta teachings held by him. And then he told Atisha that he should stay and practice these teachings and study them for 12 years, which is what he did, and we know the result of that. It was very successful. So now we're going to fast forward to present-day Indonesia. I had no idea it had the 4th largest population in the world. It's comprised of about 17,000 islands. 6,000 of those islands are inhabited. And interestingly enough, Indonesia does not call itself a Muslim country because the state says, that they're, how do they describe them? They describe themselves just as a secular state. However, more than 90% of the population is Muslim. So on every street corner, there's a mosque. And 5 times a day, cranked at full tilt, are the calls to prayers, just going full tilt. And they recognize 4 other religions, which is great. So the ones they recognize are Islam, obviously, Protestantism, Catholicism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. So Hinduism and Buddhism were thriving, many centuries ago. But by about the 13th century, traders from India started arriving, and along with these traders, there were many Muslims who started arriving on the island. And by the end of the 16th century, Islam had surpassed Hinduism and Buddhism as the dominant religion of people. So in present-day Indonesia, about 2% of the population calls themselves Buddhist. Now, we know when people call themselves a certain religion, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually practicing, but that's the percentage of people that sort of call themselves Buddhist. So in about 1955, apparently, Buddhism started to make a comeback in Indonesia when a monk called Ashin Jinakarita started to tour across various regions. And since that time, there's been a very strong revival of Theravada Buddhism, but there's also, the Mahayana tradition is there as well. So one of the things that just stands out in my mind is to meet a small portion of this 2%, and to see their absolute love and respect for the Dharma, and their love and respect for Venerable Children throughout all of these teaching events. There were 2 retreats, there were many public talks. It was just really amazing to see that this very small group of people has the energy and the karma to attract, teachers to come and teach. So that was really, really something. So the first retreat, Venerable focused on the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas. So again, people got what Atisha went to Sumatra to get. They got teachings on bodhicitta. The last 2 nights in Medan, Venerable Children gave 2 public talks. And the first night there was about 300 people at this talk, and the second night there was close to 500. And again, it was just an audience absolutely soaking in everything she had to say. Absolutely soaking it in. And there was a huge range of age groups there, but there was a lot of young people, which was very, very great to see. And both nights, the event was absolutely run by their youth group there. So they were in charge of making the sound system work, which we know is always an ongoing challenge. They were continually setting out more chairs throughout the evening. And they were just on top of everything, and they looked so happy. They were wearing these little shirts identifying themselves as the youth group. So that was really great to see. Then before leaving Medan, Venerable Children had time to go and visit a women's prison. And it's not fair to compare experiences, but this one really stands out in my mind because a number of us here have been to prisons, and maybe you have too, but a prison in the United States takes some work to get into. We have to send our documents, we have to send our passports, they have to be checked, and once we make it through that first level of checking, then at the prison there's all of these security measures. We go through a metal detector, we go through many doors where there's guards looking at you all the time, and it's really heavy duty. Well, there was no background check. They didn't know who we were. They knew that we were religious people. They didn't ask for any ID at the door. They just handed us a name tag when we went in, and there was no metal detector. There was just a door with a very simple chain along the bottom. And so we go in, and there's this courtyard, and it looks very friendly, nothing like an American prison or a Canadian prison or any prison I've ever seen pictures of. And there's flowers with pots that there's women tending to, and the inmates aren't in any kind of outfit. They're just wearing lay clothes. And there's cats strolling around, and it just looks like a reasonable place to be, given that it's a prison. So then they ushered us into this small room, and this is their newly renovated chapel. As it turns out, they were expecting us about 90 minutes earlier. So we get there, and everyone had dispersed, so then they had to go and round up everyone all over again. And these women came, and there was maybe about 20 women, and there was about 5 volunteers that go and work with these women. And they came in, and everyone had to be close to Venerable Children and translator. So at first they were looking a little bit shy. There's a lot of downward gazes. And as Venerable Children continued talking, the women were able to raise their gaze and look at her. And at a certain point, they were able to ask questions or make comments. And so at one point, one of the women representing everyone said something to the effect of, well, the reason we're here is because we've been tricked. Somebody tricked us, and we got caught. And everyone else was going like this. And Venerable Children was very kind in her response, but she didn't allow them to entertain this too much longer. And she very wisely and skillfully pointed out that, if we're spending time with people who are maybe suspicious or doing things that aren't on the up and up, it's up to us to really, make discerning judgments about who we spend our time with. And if someone asks us to carry something, we should really find out what it is we're carrying, And I thought they would all sort of maybe shut down and their gaze would go back to the floor and they'd sort of think, oh, this woman doesn't know what she's talking about. But there was not that response at all. They just kept looking at her. And pretty soon they were nodding their heads. And she was talking about, having responsibility for our life and our actions. And they absolutely soaked it in. And she really emphasized, that there's no need to feel guilt about mistakes we've made in the past, that, these things we can learn from and we can inspire each other by what we're learning from. And they took it in. They took it in. And then they asked her to give a name to the chapel. So some of you know the news already, but the chapel now in this women's prison is called Sravasti Chapel. So we're going to be sending a picture of the community to these women to put in the chapel. And now there's this connection with these women and venerable children and the Dharma. So that was just so touching. Following that, we went to a second retreat. We flew to Jakarta, which is the largest city in Indonesia. There's 9 million plus people. And we went to a retreat center on the outskirts of the city, which was absolutely gorgeous. And then Venerable taught. The teachings are based on the book, One Teacher, Many Traditions. The book she co-authored with His Holiness. Again, that book touches on bodhicitta. So again, Atisha's hard work is coming to fruition here 1,005 years later. So I think what really stands out from the trip, and I think I'm still figuring out what all happened, but just to see that this very small committed group of people are working so hard to reestablish Buddhism there. And a lot of things have happened over the last 1,005 years. And I think some of the things they've heard are sort of mixed in with folklore. And now they're getting, authentic teachings happening there. And they just really want the real thing. And how fortunate they're getting the real thing. And then there's some breaking news. Venerable Tarpa sent this message around this morning, and maybe someone else will do a BBC on this. But the breaking news is the first Theravada ordination of bhikshunis in Indonesia after 1,000 years happened June 21st. So this is really exciting. So things are really happening in Indonesia with such a small group there of committed people. So the teachings from the Medan section of the tour, I think, are already posted, at least in audio form. The Jakarta teachings are on the way, and so you can keep checking tuptenchildren.org. And if there's time in the future, I'll tell another story about a little kitty called Merit.